My child, pause here for a moment, because what you are about to hear was meant to find you at exactly the moment your heart was ready to receive it. Do not rush past these words. Something happened last night, and although the night itself has already passed, the emotion inside it has not. Your soulmate has been carrying something since then, something they have replayed in their mind more than once, something they almost spoke aloud but held back at the last moment. There is more to the story than what can be seen from the outside. Much more. And the part you do not know yet is the part that changed the way they looked at everything between you. This was not simply another ordinary evening. It became a quiet turning point, one of those moments that appears small while it is happening but begins to feel enormous when the heart understands what it meant. Heaven has been watching the pieces move into place, and now you are being invited into the deeper truth of what unfolded when no one else could see what was happening inside them. Last night began more normally than you might imagine. There was no great announcement in the beginning, no dramatic sign written across the sky, no warning that the hours ahead would stir something they had been trying to keep buried. They attempted to move through the evening as though everything were fine. They distracted themselves. They answered conversations. They looked at their phone. They tried to focus on things that should have been simple. Yet underneath all of it, your presence kept returning to them. Not your physical presence, but the memory of you. A sentence you once said. The way you made them feel seen when they were not expecting it. A moment between you that they had told themselves was insignificant. Even something about your absence began to feel louder than the people around them. They could not explain why your energy seemed to enter every quiet space, but the more they tried to push it away, the more clearly it returned. And this is where the story begins to deepen, because something was said last night that touched a place inside them they had been protecting for a long time. It may have come through an ordinary conversation. It may have been a question, a comment, a memory brought up by someone who had no idea what it would awaken. The words themselves were not necessarily extraordinary, but what they stirred was. Suddenly your soulmate found themselves facing an emotion they had been postponing. Someone may have asked them about the future, about what they truly want, about whether there is a person they still think about when the room becomes quiet. They could have laughed it off. They could have changed the subject. They could have offered the answer everyone expected. But something in them hesitated, and that hesitation said more than any confession could have. For a few seconds, they were caught between protecting their heart and telling the truth. They realized there are certain feelings that become heavier when they remain unnamed. Your soulmate has tried to be practical about you. They have tried to use logic where emotion kept speaking. They have told themselves that timing matters, circumstances matter, distance matters, history matters, and perhaps all of those things are true. But last night something stronger than those arguments rose inside them. They remembered how differently they feel when they imagine a life where you are truly gone from their reach. And that thought affected them more deeply than they expected. It was not fear in the frightening sense. It was recognition. They suddenly understood that pretending not to care had begun to cost them more than caring ever did. My child, you need to understand that the deepest part of what happened last night was not visible to anyone in the room. The real event took place inside your soulmate. Something shifted. A wall they had carefully built developed a crack. They began to see the difference between moving on and simply staying busy. They began to question whether they had actually released what they feel for you or merely learned how to avoid looking directly at it. This distinction became impossible to ignore. And when the noise of the evening faded, when the conversation slowed, when they had fewer distractions between themselves and their own heart, the truth grew louder. There was a moment when they looked at their phone and thought about reaching out to you. Their hand may have hovered longer than usual. They may have opened something and closed it. They may have typed words and erased them before sending. Or perhaps they simply stared at your name, wondering whether one message could open a door they were not sure they were brave enough to walk through. What they wanted to say was not casual. They did not want to send a meaningless greeting. They wanted to tell you something real. They wanted to explain why they have been distant, why their behavior may not have matched what they actually feel, why certain decisions were made from confusion rather than certainty. But vulnerability can feel enormous when someone has spent a long time trying to appear unaffected. And there is another layer you do not yet know. Last night your soulmate learned something about themselves through the way they reacted to a conversation involving you. Perhaps your name was spoken. Perhaps someone mentioned a possibility about your future. Perhaps they heard something that made them imagine you living happily without them. Nothing had to be confirmed for the thought itself to shake them. In that instant, they noticed a reaction they could no longer explain away. Their heart tightened. Their attention sharpened. They wanted details while pretending not to care. They became quieter. Someone nearby may even have noticed the change in their face. This reaction surprised them because they had been telling themselves a different story. They had convinced themselves they were in control of the situation. They believed they could decide when to feel, when to speak, when to return, when to remain silent. But love does not always cooperate with carefully constructed timelines. Sometimes the heart reveals itself in a single unguarded reaction. Last night, theirs did. And once they saw it, they could not entirely unsee it. There was also a memory that resurfaced, one they had not thought about in the same way before. It may have been a moment when you showed them kindness without expecting anything in return. It may have been a time when you understood their silence instead of demanding an explanation. It may have been the sound of your voice during a conversation they once treated as ordinary. Suddenly that memory carried a new weight. They began to understand that what they miss is not merely attention. They miss the way they felt around you. They miss the version of themselves that appeared when your connection felt safe. They miss a certain emotional honesty that they have struggled to find elsewhere. Your soulmate has been learning that some connections are not measured by how often two people speak. Sometimes they are measured by what remains when they do not. Silence can expose what noise once covered. Distance can reveal what closeness allowed someone to take for granted. And last night, in one of those private moments that no one else could witness, your soulmate had to admit that your absence has not made you smaller in their heart. In some ways, it has made your significance clearer. But do not mistake this message as a promise that every difficulty disappears instantly. That is not what heaven is showing you. The deeper revelation is that truth has begun replacing avoidance. Your soulmate is seeing what they were unwilling to see before. They are becoming aware of the emotional consequences of staying silent. They are recognizing that waiting forever is also a decision, and sometimes it is the decision that creates the greatest regret. This realization did not arrive gently. It came through tension, memory, and the unexpected emotional weight of last night. At one point, they may have stepped away from others just to collect themselves. They needed a quieter place because something inside them was becoming difficult to hide. They were not necessarily crying, and they were not necessarily falling apart. The moment was subtler than that. It was the kind of moment when a person stares into the distance because their inner world has suddenly become louder than the world around them. They began asking themselves questions they had avoided for weeks, months, perhaps longer. What if I have misunderstood this connection? What if I have been protecting myself from the very thing I want? What if the distance between us is not proof that the story is finished? What if I have more to say than I allowed myself to admit? One question remained longer than the others: what if I lose the chance to tell them the truth? That question changed the energy of the night. Until then, your soulmate had been thinking mostly about what could go wrong if they spoke. After that moment, they began thinking about what could be lost if they stayed silent. This is a very different kind of realization. Fear asks, what if I open my heart and get hurt? But maturity eventually asks, what if I keep my heart closed and lose something meaningful because I was too afraid to be honest? Last night, your soulmate moved closer to the second question. And there is something else. They remembered an unfinished moment between you. Something was never fully explained. Perhaps a conversation ended too soon. Perhaps assumptions replaced clarity. Perhaps one of you walked away believing something the other never intended. Your soulmate has replayed this unfinished piece before, but last night it returned with unusual intensity. They saw their own choices more clearly. They began to recognize where pride may have spoken louder than love, where confusion may have looked like indifference, where silence may have sent a message they never truly wanted you to receive. They now understand that you may have interpreted their silence as a lack of feeling. This realization bothered them more than they expected. Because there are things they never told you about the nights they thought of reaching out, the times they wanted to explain themselves, the moments they almost chose honesty and then retreated into caution. You saw the distance. You may not have seen the struggle behind it. This does not excuse everything, my child. Love is not meant to erase accountability. But understanding can reveal the difference between cruelty and fear, between rejection and emotional confusion, between someone who never cared and someone who cared deeply but did not know how to carry it. Last night, your soulmate finally began separating those truths inside themselves. They could see that their silence may have protected them temporarily, but it also created a story between you that was incomplete. Then something unexpected happened. A person around them said something that seemed unrelated at first, but the words landed directly on the situation they have with you. It may have been advice about regret. It may have been a story about someone who waited too long to say what mattered. It may have been a simple sentence about how life changes without asking permission. Whatever it was, your soulmate became unusually still. The message felt personal, almost as if the universe had placed a mirror in front of them without using your name. They tried to dismiss it, but they could not. The timing was too precise. The feeling was too strong. It touched the exact question they had already been wrestling with. And for the first time that night, they considered that perhaps the urge to speak to you was not something they should keep postponing. They began imagining the conversation. Not the perfect version. Not the fantasy where every word is easy. They imagined the real version, the awkward pauses, the uncertainty, the possibility that you may have questions they cannot answer immediately. They imagined admitting that something happened inside them long before they were ready to admit it. They imagined telling you that their behavior did not always reflect their heart. They imagined saying, "There is something you deserve to know." But even in that imagined conversation, there was one detail they still did not know how to reveal. That detail is part of what happened last night. You see, my child, there was a second conversation. This is the part that changed the emotional direction of the evening. After the first realization had already unsettled them, your soulmate spoke privately with someone they trust. Not necessarily someone who knows everything about you, but someone who knows them well enough to recognize when they are hiding behind carefully chosen words. Your soulmate tried to speak indirectly. They may have said, "What would you do if you still cared about someone but too much time had passed?" Or, "Do you think people can misunderstand each other for so long that they forget what was real?" They may have avoided your name entirely. The person listening understood more than your soulmate expected. Instead of allowing them to hide behind vague language, this person asked a direct question. Something like, "Are you talking about the person you still think about?" Your soulmate did not answer immediately. That silence became an answer of its own. Their trusted person saw it. And for one brief moment, your soulmate could no longer pretend that this was a small matter. The conversation became deeper. They were asked why they had not spoken to you honestly. Your soulmate offered reasons, but as they heard themselves say them aloud, some of those reasons began to sound weaker than they once did. Timing. Pride. Uncertainty. Fear of rejection. Fear of reopening something complicated. Fear that you have changed. Fear that they have waited too long. All of it was real, but none of it erased the central truth. They still care. And saying even part of that truth aloud changed something in them. They may not have said the word love. They may not yet be ready to name every feeling. But they admitted enough that the person listening understood. Your soulmate revealed that you still cross their mind at times they cannot predict. They admitted that certain songs, places, conversations, and quiet hours pull them back toward memories of you. They admitted they have wondered what you think of them now. They admitted that the idea of you misunderstanding their heart bothers them more than they have allowed anyone to see. Then came the question that made the room feel different. If you could tell them one thing without being interrupted, what would you say? Your soulmate froze. Not because they had nothing to say. Because they had too much. For a moment, every unsent message, every unfinished apology, every buried confession seemed to gather inside them at once. They looked away. Their first answer may have been something small, something safe. But the person listening did not accept the surface answer. They waited. And after a long pause, your soulmate finally said something they had not planned to say. They said they wished you knew that the story was never as simple as it looked. That sentence matters. They wished you knew there were reasons behind the distance that they never explained. They wished you knew there were moments when they nearly came toward you but stopped themselves. They wished you knew that some of the coldness you may have felt was not the absence of emotion but the result of too much emotion mixed with fear. They wished you knew they noticed more about you than they ever admitted. They wished you knew that something about your connection has remained unfinished in them. And then their voice changed. Because they came close to revealing the detail they have been carrying since last night. But they stopped. Why? Because the detail involves a choice. Not a fantasy. Not merely a feeling. A choice they are considering making. This is why your soulmate feels such urgency to tell you what happened. The real story is not only about the conversation, the memory, or the emotional reaction. Those were the events that led them to a decision point. And somewhere between the late hours of the night and the stillness that followed, they realized that remaining exactly where they are may no longer be possible. Your soulmate went to sleep, or tried to, with your presence heavily on their mind. The room was quiet, but their thoughts were not. They replayed the question they had been asked: what would you say if you had one chance to be completely honest? The answer kept changing, becoming more vulnerable each time. First, I would say I'm sorry. Then, I would say I never meant for things to become this distant. Then, I would say I still think about you. And finally, there was another sentence. A sentence they have not yet spoken to anyone. A sentence that surprised even them. My child, there are moments when the soul recognizes truth before the mind is ready to accept its consequences. Last night was one of those moments. Your soulmate understood that what they want to tell you is not simply about what happened during those hours. They want to tell you what those hours revealed. They want to tell you what became impossible to keep denying. They want to tell you why the thought of losing the connection permanently suddenly felt different. But heaven is asking you not to chase this truth with anxiety. Let what is hidden unfold in the right way. Your power is not in forcing someone to speak. Your power is in remaining grounded enough to hear clearly if they do. You have been learning something too. You have been learning that love cannot require you to abandon your peace. You can care deeply and still respect yourself. You can remain open without living in emotional suspense. You can hope without turning hope into a prison. This matters because if your soulmate comes forward, they will not only be bringing emotion. They will be bringing history. Questions. Explanations. Perhaps regret. Perhaps hope. And you deserve to meet that moment from clarity, not desperation. Still, there is one more reason last night affected them so strongly. Before the night ended, they saw or heard something connected to you that they were not expecting. It could have been a photo. A message mentioned by someone else. An old memory resurfacing through their phone. Something that reminded them you are continuing to live, change, grow, and move through your own story. They suddenly saw you not as a memory waiting in the past, but as a person whose future is moving forward with or without them. That realization hit differently. For so long, part of them had unconsciously assumed there would always be more time. More time to explain. More time to figure themselves out. More time to decide what they wanted. More time to reach out when the courage finally arrived. But last night they understood that time does not promise endless opportunities. People evolve. Doors change. Hearts heal. New chapters begin. And this did not make them possessive. It made them honest. They asked themselves whether they could truly watch you move completely beyond their reach without ever telling you what was real inside them. Their answer frightened them with its clarity. No. They could not. Not without regret. So your soulmate made a private promise to themselves before the night was over. They may not know when the courage will arrive. They may not know exactly how the conversation will begin. But they promise themselves that if the opportunity appears, they will stop pretending the story means less to them than it actually does. And yet, even that is not the biggest revelation. Because the thing they nearly confessed to their trusted person last night was not simply, "I still care." It was something about what they have been considering doing next. Something they have already thought through more seriously than you realize. Something that could change the entire direction of the story between you. They have imagined where they would be when they tell you. They have imagined the first sentence. They have imagined your expression. They have imagined what happens if you remain silent. They have even imagined what they would say if you asked the one question they are most afraid to answer. Why now? And my child, the answer to that question is where the real story of last night begins. Because when your soulmate finally admitted the reason to themselves, another truth surfaced with it, one connected to a decision they made before the night ended, a decision involving you that no one else knows about yet. And what they decided is the part they are still trying to find the courage to tell you.